Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Weekly Reads. I've had a mixed reading week this week. Over the weekend, I read Radiance by Catherynne and Valente for Space Opera September. Space Opera September is a reading event in the month of September in which participants read space opera. This is a reread. This is the third time I've read it, and Radiance is a space opera set in the early 20th century in a radically altered solar system. In the world of Radiance, all of the planets are habitable. The gas giants are terrestrial, except for maybe Jupiter, but Uranus is definitely terrestrial. Saturn, I think, is definitely terrestrial. Neptune is a water world, but they're all terrestrial and, as I said, habitable. Also, the planets are far closer together, allowing for easier transit via rocket ship and using 19th century technology. Humans in this setting began to colonize the planets in the late 19th century, and by the time the novel takes place, the colonies are beginning to thrive. The moon is the location of the film industry, and that is where the bulk of Radiance doesn't necessarily take place, but is sort of one of the hearts of the story. Radiance is very much about the film industry. As I've mentioned numerous times, it is about, in part, a father coming to terms with the death of his daughter in the only way he knows how. That isn't all Radiance is about, although coming to terms with the death of Severine Onk is one of the core parts of the story. Well, really, it is the core narrative. Radiance is about Severine Onk, a documentary filmmaker, the daughter of Percival Onk, who is famous for his gothic thrillers. Severine, being a documentary filmmaker, decides to go on an investigative documentary film to investigate what happened to the city of Adonis on Venus. Adonis, alongside a number of other colonies, Persephone on Pluto and Io on Mars, were mysteriously destroyed. And in Adonis, there was one survivor, a young boy who constantly walks around a memorial for Callaway divers. In the setting, Callaway milk is necessary for humans to be able to live on the other planets. So Severine and her crew come to Adonis to begin to film, and things start to happen. A number of crew members die, and Severine herself disappears. The novel is told in a number of texts. In film scripts, Severine's films, not only the Radiant Car, Thy Sparrows Drew, which is her Venus film, but also a film on Saturn, Neptune, Phobos. There's also a film script from one of her stepmother's films, and radio teleplay for a long-running radio drama. There are also transcripts, most notably the debriefing that her lover gave to the film studio. Also, her home movies featuring her and her father, and her father's record of his script writing sessions with his longtime script writing partner Vincenza Mako, to try to come to terms, figure out how to overcome his grief in the only way he knows how, which is to make a movie of it. Also included are the various treatments for that movie in a more traditional format. They're more narrative, which is a bit strange, and I'll get to that later, which sees the boy, Anchises, sort of initially as a private detective hired to kind of go back into his own life and figure out what happened to Catherynne, which takes a more gothic turn and then is jettisoned for a more children's story before kind of the Hercule Poirot wrap up at the end. And then finally there is a bit more. Also, there are a few editorials from two industry magazines or scandal rags, depending on how you look at them. Also, Diary of Catherynne's second stepmother, and final epilogue wrap-up thing. I have mentioned several times that I have loved this novel. I've read it twice before, and each time I have loved it. But this reading, I don't know, the novel has certainly fallen in my estimation. I'm not entirely sure if it's Space Opera September, which seems to sort of be a bit of a curse on the space opera I read for it. I haven't really gotten on with any of the books I read for Space Opera September. Even ones I've liked before that I were rather high in my estimation have decreased after I've read them. So, I don't know. But I think going back and thinking about why I initially loved this book, I think is the fact that this book is experimental. This is not your typical space opera. This book is quite experimental in structure and form, which space opera, much like most science fiction, aren't necessarily. Science fiction and space opera do get a bit experimental, it's usually in terms of theme and subject, rather than in structure and form. Although I think shorter fiction does tend to be where science fiction and also fantasy tend to be more experimental. But I think how the story is told, the experimental nature of it, I think really attracted me, as well as initially the language. Catherynne and Valente's style, the language is rather ornate. It's rather beautiful. But on this reading, the language was a bit, I don't know, it seemed a bit silly. And I don't know, like that beautiful to silly. I mean, and the thing that kind of jumped out at me was the pretentiousness of a lot of the titles in this. Obviously, Severin Unk's documentary films are all pretentiously titled. I mean, I'm not entirely sure where the Radiant Car Thy Sparrows Drew relates to Venus at all. Although that could just be her father, whose films are also quite pretentiously titled. And there are other really pretentiously titled films in this world. But I'm also not entirely sure the various threads, the various texts, necessarily really come together to really stick the landing anymore. The more I'm thinking about it, the more I don't think they really come together to really make an ending or really say anything much at all. Now, I will admit, as much as I have loved this book in the past, there are parts that have always bugged me. And that is the various treatments for Percival Unk's film about his daughter. I've never really liked any of those stories, which might actually be the point, because obviously they are meant to be not come together, to not really work, to be dissatisfying. So anyway, but all in all, I was and am incredibly frustrated with my reading of Radiance this time around. Now, as is or has been the typical sort of pattern for me, is that when I'm disappointed by fiction, I turn to history, and it's glorious. I'm loving the history I'm reading, and this week pretty much proved that rule increasingly, or that rule that's becoming more prevalent with me. So I read Winter King by Thomas Penn. This is a book about the final decade or so of the reign of Henry VII, when his method of government became ever more exploitative, extractive, tyrannical, and how the early months of Henry VIII's reign sort of, while on the surface repudiated the excesses of Henry VII's reign, codified a lot of the methods into English law. I enjoyed this book. It was an amazing, engrossing reading experience. I enjoyed every moment I spent with this book, even if a lot of it was rather depressing. A lot of the counselors that surrounded Henry VII, particularly before his death, were rather nasty and brutish people who pretty much bled the kingdom dry. And and many of them did not get any sort of comeuppance. So anyway, that was my reading week. Going forward for this upcoming reading week, I am planning on reading 2 novels for Space Opera September. This weekend I will be reading A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. This again will be a reread. I think I read it the first time for the first Space Opera September. It is about an ambassador, Mahid Zamer, who is appointed to the Teixkanli Empire to be their new ambassador, to figure out what happened to her predecessor, and to figure out what exactly the hell he's been up to. All the while, there are political shenanigans going on at home, and also a mysterious alien force that is lurking in the background. And also, there are political tensions within the Taix colonial empire itself. I've read this a few times already, and I'm still not entirely sure what I make of A Memory Called Empire. I love the climax. And there are other parts of the novel that I think are really well done. But there are a lot of scenes and threads in the novel that I'm not particularly fond of. And I want to give this another go. And hopefully I will kind of come to a decision on what I really think of this novel. And then over the course of the work week, I will be reading the sequel to A Memory Called Empire, A Desolation Called Peace, in which Mahit Zamer and her attaché when she was ambassador to the Taix colonial empire, and eventually her lover, 3 Seagrass, are called up to aid in trying to negotiate with the mysterious alien presence that haunted the first book. And I'm not entirely sure where it goes from there because I haven't read it yet. So I'm quite looking forward to see how it progresses. And I will report back next week for weekly reads. So yeah. So hopefully, I mean, like I mentioned, I don't know if this upcoming week is going to be good or another frustrating week because of, for whatever reason, I have had bad luck with Space Opera September. Although, to be fair, I typically do not have much success with any of the booktube readathons, reading challenges, events that I participate in. I am usually rather put out by them. It could just be that I'm by nature a mood reader, or that I'm still in this weird, whatever it is, reading transition thing I'm in. Because I have had some success with Nonfiction November, although in that case, by the time the end of November comes around, I am rather tired of nonfiction. So, anyway. Yeah, so that was weekly reads for this week. So next week, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do on Monday. I think I want to do a tag. And then, of course, a tag on Tuesday. I have been wanting to do the in or out tag that created by Rick McDonnell, and also the Steve Donahue's additional tag. But I need to actually watch Steve's video so I can kind of get a refresher on his questions, which are a bit specific. So I kind of need some definitions on what he's talking about. Because I tried to do the tag a month ago or so. And when I got to his questions, I'm like, what the heck is he talking about? So I need to have a refresher. Of course, the video is 49 minutes, so I'm going to have to find time to watch the video again. But anyway, I'm also definitely wanting to do the Q tag from Jim of Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff. I am loving his alphabet tags, and doing any other tags I can find. And I also want to start doing Poetry Thursday, which I've been meaning to do for a while and I haven't gotten around to. Although my defense this week, because I wanted to do a double tag video on Thursday, or do 2 poems, I ended up having to make some potato salad, and that took pretty much my filming time to work on. as well as getting supper started, which pretty much the prep work took my filming time. Rather annoying, but the potato salad turned out fantastic, so I'll take it. Anyway, BookTube, I'm starting to ramble, so I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. Thank you. Have a great weekend and evening, and I will see you next week. So please stay safe.